From our class last Friday, there was one thing that I still wanted to do, which was to discuss the Harlem Renaissance as a precursor of um, a place that nourished many of Hansberry's ideas. And I believe that this is a key movement, and anyone who expects a better understanding of raising in the sun should go back to, which is the Harlem Renaissance. Without further ado, the second decade, I'm sorry, of the 20th century uh, presented a United States that was not only about Gatsby's glamorous wild champagne and oyster parties or bootlegging or jazz music, or it wasn't either about Babbitt's attempts to be himself in an age that dictated duties of consumerism and standardization. The jazz age was also of the Black American. So, sharing in the prosperity of the nation after World War I, again, remember, 1919, many blacks migrated away from the terrible South that was characterized by its bitter legacy of segregation and slavery to New York City, where they relocated in an excellently sited district that boasted some of the finest housing stock that blacks had ever been allowed to inhabit. So, as a natural response to this new social and economic status, African Americans assumed a new confidence in themselves and in their abilities. This was extensively reflected in magazines and in newspapers, on the stage, in nightclubs, and of course, in literature and music in a way that had virtually never happened before. Just to give you an idea, this time also gave us the first African American millionaire. That was the woman who invented the form of straightening black woman's hair, right? Yet, in the middle of this affluence, greater freedom and joy, blacks were still, according to Johnson and Michelson, border artists secured by a border patrol. So, end quote. Opposed to this border patrol's silencing and archetyping forces, a new generation of black artists emerged to find their voice, their place, and their own selves, giving birth to the literary and cultural phenomenon that we know as the Harlem Renaissance. With the publication of Alan Locke's showcase anthology, The New Negro, in 1925, there you have the reference, the movement's literature, music, and art were finally catalogued and documented. And what this Howard University sociology professor sought was to construct a, and I quote, transformed and transforming psychology of the new Negro out of the development of a more positive self-respect and self-reliance, end quote. And a race pride, basically. So in Locke's view, the real significance of this manifesto, apart from emphasizing black achievements in the arts, rested in its claim to open the canon. The New Negro, that was the title of the book, craved to become mainstream artists so as to have access, in Marxist terms we could say, to the American means of production. In Locke's words, and I quote, America seeking a new spiritual expansion and artistic maturity, trying to establish an American literature and national art implies a Negro American culture seeking the same satisfactions and objectives, end quote. However different the skin color and material may be, Locke adds, the Negro culture is an integral part of the age and cultural settings. Bear in mind, as I said, that whenever we use the word Negro, we are using it as in reference to the novel and as a quote from the work itself. Of course, needless to say, but better said. So the body work produced by the younger group of the New Negro movement, later known as the Harlem Renaissance, included artists such as Countee Cullen, Langston Hughes, Sterling Brown, and Zora Neale Hurston, and several others in contrastingly different from their predecessors, the other black artists that had come before them. Because it involved a revolt against the only type of poetry that black artists were allowed to produce up until that moment. That is the Negro dialect poetry as it is known. It also rose against the typical stereotypes of blacks, stereotypes that we discussed last class, like the mammy, the pickaninny, the Jezebel, the happy-go-lucky, or the thief, among others. And it finally opposed sentimental and supplicatory moods. So this younger generation of poets and short story writers and novelists attempted to express their feelings of disillusionment and bitterness. Out of it, there came poetry of protest, rebellion, and despair, as we are going to see in the three examples that I'd like to discuss by Langston Hughes today. The group also revolted against the race problem poetry. Although this New Negro group did not succeed in dismissing, of course, the race subject matter altogether, I mean, we know that the race subject matter is one of the themes in Hansberry's play, many of them did find a new, subtler approach to it, which shows in the ultimate effectiveness of their poetry. So these young New Negroes desired to be simply poets, right? This group of African Americans, that is what they wanted, and all that the term, of course, entails, while letting the world know that they were black poets proud of themselves and of their people. In the 1926 manifesto, the Negro artist and the racial mountain, that has now become a milestone of genuinely African American art, Langston Hughes exhorts the Negro artist, and I quote, to change through the force of his art that old whispering, I want to be white, hidden in the aspirations of his people. To, why should I want to be white? I am a Negro and I am beautiful. End quote. This is the same spirit as the one that renders the younger poet's verse unique, right? So on to Langston Hughes. Hughes was born at the turn of the century and won national recognition in the 1920s. Before that, before the age of 21, Hughes had already experienced a variety of hardships, working as a flower delivery boy in New York, a cabaret doorman, and a second cook in Paris, a deck painter on a European steamer, and a tourist in the Mexican wilderness. This experience, together with his strong love for reading and his Lincoln University studies, made him speak to and for the black everyman. Hughes' magnificence rests in his unbound free verse and experimentation with African rhythms like ragtime and spirituals, and in a variety of dialectal voices, and in a conclusively perfective Whitmanesque style, and Walt Whitman, of course. And as a first example, we're going to discuss briefly The Negro Speaks of Rivers that we read on Friday. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So this one is perhaps the most memorable of his poem, and it reveals Langston Hughes' superb lyric. In a cathartic attempt to find roots, the poetic voice traces Negro history as far back as the Euphrates, where, as we said last class, where one finds the oldest traces of Western civilization and the beginnings of history, passing through the Nile, where the blacks supposedly erected the pyramids, to the Mississippi, around which African Americans settled once they were free. So the metaphor of rivers as blood, which suggests that great ancient civilization achievements run down the Negro veins as well, is built, beautifully built, I may say, as the poetic voice pinpoints the most important heritage instances of black civilization. Thus, the poetic voice suggests that the experience of their black ancestry gives the African American the knowledge that makes it strong, makes him, her, them strong, not only physically, but most essentially spiritually. The new Negro's soul has grown deep like the rivers, right? Therefore, implying that the black is the great ancient civilization. The question remains open yet as whether this rewriting or appropriation of history is in fact Negro history or an attempt to project themselves as a great people. But this is precisely what made the Harlem Renaissance great, in the sense that they elbow their way into a whitewashed history, right? So the next poem that I'd like to discuss, and I don't know why I have that blurb in the middle, but it is Good Morning Revolution. Good morning, revolution. You are the very best friend I ever had. We're gonna pal around together from now on. Say, listen, revolution. You know the boss where I used to work, the guy that gave me the air to cut down expenses. He wrote a long letter to the papers about you. Said you was a troublemaker, an alien enemy. In other words, a son of a bitch. He called up the police and told them to watch out for a guy named Revolution. You see, the boss knows you're my friend. He sees us hanging out together. He knows we're hungry and ragged, and I ain't got a damn thing in this world and are gonna do something about it. The bosses got all the needs, certainly. Eats well, owns a lot of houses, goes vacationing, breaks strikes, runs politics, bribes police, pays off Congress, and struts all over the earth. But me, I ain't never had enough to eat. Me, I ain't never been warm in winter. Me, I ain't never known security. All my life been living hand to mouth, hand to mouth. Listen, Revolution, we're buddies, see? Together we can take everything. Factories, arsenals, houses, ships, railroads, forests, fields, orchards, bus lines, telegraphs, radios. Jesus, raise hell with radios. Steel mills, coal mines, oil wells, gas, all the tools of production. Great day in the morning. Everything, and turn them over to the people who work. Rule and run them for us people who work. Boy, them radios, broadcasting that very first morning to USSR. Another member of International Soviets done come. Greetings to the Socialist Soviet Republics. Hey, you rising workers everywhere, greetings. And we'll sign it. Germany, sign it. China, sign it. Africa, sign it. Poland, sign it. Italy, sign it. America, sign it with my one name, worker. On that day, no one will be hungry, cold, oppressed anywhere in the world again. That's our job. I've been starving too long. Ain't you? Let's go, Revolution. So Langston Hughes' rebellious spirit, both in subject matter and form, is laid bare in this poem, as you can very well see. Flowing like street chat, grooving with folk rhythm, busting with catalogs, bravado, and sardonic undertones. His individual technique is that in this poem is worth praising. Say, listen, Revolution, you know the boss where I used to work. Said you was a troublemaker, an alien enemy. In other words, a son of a bitch. This, as I was saying, this alien enemy is a clear metaphor for the African American himself and his desires for self-respect, which were clearly not welcomed by bosses. Notice that the boss is also a euphemism to refer to white people in A Raisin in the Sun, right? Since the poetic character was fired for having a revolutionary spirit. So the poetic voice's experience with revolutionary activity is no more than that of an overt summoning for the Negro to, and I quote Hughes again, stand on top of the racial mountain and be free within ourselves, end quote. Moreover, in the last lines, the poetic voice calls the Negro worker with a socialist undertone to act upon the prevailing situation, to take everything and turn him over to the people who work. The final lines of the verse are the triggers to act, right? I've been starving too long, ain't you? Let's go, revolution. So this poem is Whitmanesque, both in style and in spirit. And it is most significant that Hughes should equate himself with the most American of American writers. I find that truly fascinating and commendable. Now, again, we go back to the poem that started it all, the epigraph to a raisin, Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? I love this poem. Certainly, no further words are necessary to prove Langston Hughes' mastery to create a three-dimensional persona, right? He breaks with his predecessors' archetypes and forms and tone and matter and created highly experimental, melodic, intellectual, self-reliant, and organic poetry. I believe that he is undoubtedly the great 20th century African-American transcendentalist. It is significant to reiterate that the aim of the Harlem Renaissance in constructing a three-dimensional African-American persona was successfully achieved in the poetry of Langston Hughes. This construction points to the current fact that identity is fabricated along a process that he starts, but then that Hansberry also takes over, right? And it involves psychological and social and cultural factors. It would be of much interest to know if the archetype produced in the 1920s, the African Americans of the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, that is the royal Negro, the militant Negro, the Negro with ancient roots, the doubting Negro, the civilized Negro, and the learned Negro were successful enough to erase the mainstream damaging and racial two-dimensional images of the Negro in the blues age. I believe that you can certainly find these archetypes, these new archetypes brought about by the Harlem Renaissance in Hansberry's wonderful play. So I believe that although it seems somehow an impossible task to prove, I think that the Harlem Renaissance artists left a valuable legacy, not only in literary terms, but also in social and political ones. The literary terms are easy, and of course we have studied them in Hansberry's play. It would be interesting to see the other ones. It would not be altogether mistaken to fashion that both the literary productions that sprang from and the sociological changes that occurred in the mid-20th century were modeled in these African-American tenets. It is a wonder and I believe a shame that very often still Black artists of the time are considered border literature. So that's my very brief, although kind of long presentation that I failed because we didn't have time to discuss on Friday, but that will hopefully give you further food for thought. So thank you very much for your attention.